And welcome and thank you for attending our forum tonight, which is to provide you with an update and a status of our school building project. There are some of the agendas for the meeting on the back chairs right against the wall if anybody would like those.
Tom, I guess it's up to you now.
Thanks. If you could just click to the next one.
Tom, maybe we should introduce ourselves, actually. I didn't even think about that.
Sure. Of course, we're
As I
up
go
here
around,
anyway,
yeah.
but I'm Tom Brown, Chair of the committee.
Go back.
Go.
I'm Mel Overmoyer with Colliers International, the owner's project manager.
Bert Gardner with Kalo and Beanick Architects. We're the architects for the project.
And I'm Mayor Karen Cadger.
Nancy Follinsby, Superintendent.
I'm Gail Doran. I'm the Director of Business Services for the school department.
Thanks. So just a little bit of background, and Mayor Cadger formed the school building committee to work with her and the school department to evaluate the need for updating our elementary and middle school facilities, to determine the best model for meeting that need, and to support that model in the community. The committee is, as you can see the names of all the committee members up here on this slide, the committee is comprised of representatives from the business community, the school department, and city residents. What you will hear tonight is that the need is great, and you will see our conclusion of the best model to move forward, and I hope see our enthusiasm and support for that model. Also tonight you will see preliminary cost for that solution, and you will see preliminary cost to our residents to support that solution. You should all know that the committee did not come to this recommendation quickly. There have been regular meetings to review very detailed information provided to us from the project manager and the architects. There have been visioning sessions conducted by the school department to get public input on the educational needs. There have been meetings in Boston for some of our members to present information to the MSBA. This is our second public forum, and we are planning additional forums in the coming months. We also formed a small working group of the larger committee, which met in between regular meetings to work in greater detail and explore all possible options in an effort to bring forward the best possible solution for all of our elementary and middle school students in Easthampton. If for any reason we cannot answer all your questions tonight, we will make every effort to get back to you with an answer. I would ask that we will have a Q&A session at the end, so I would ask if you have any questions, you hang on to the end. Also, please feel free at any time to contact the mayor, the superintendent, or any member of the committee. We want everyone to be as informed and as knowledgeable as possible about this project. Doors are open. We want this to be transparent. We want to make sure we can answer everyone's questions along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So we are going to go through a little bit of the process this evening. I also just want to extend my thank you to all of you who are here this evening, and I hope that you know what you hear tonight you'll share with others. And I'm just going to add to what Thomas said, that if you have questions, we certainly want to hear them, and we will get the answers for you. So we'll get started with the need. That's clearly where we started in thinking about this project. Our elementary schools and our middle school are not adequate now for providing a 21st century education for the children in Easthampton. All of our elementary schools are over 100 years old. Actually, they're all over 100 years old at this point in time. That's Maple School, Center School, and Pepin School. They have antiquated mechanical systems. They are inefficient and costly. They have their shell, which is the outside of the building, the roof and the windows and all of that kind of thing, lead to high utility costs in all of our buildings. They have limited outdoor play and learning spaces. Our children play on paved play areas, and our buildings are overcrowded. We have classrooms that are sometimes on stairwells. small group instruction, sometimes in the area outside the elevator over at Pepin School. Every single inch of space is used in our elementary schools, and we just don't have room to do the kind of learning that we want to provide for our students. We have no room to expand the buildings. They're locked by neighborhoods, and so there's really not enough room to expand any of the individual buildings. And we have inadequate parking, and I'm sure I see some of you whose children go to our schools or who are teaching in our schools, and so I know you're well aware of the parking difficulties that we have at our elementary schools. White Brick Middle School is a younger school. It's 45 years old, but it has failing building systems. It was not built in a way that would sustain it for all time. And so we've had to replace a boiler at White Brick this year. We have window systems that are inadequate. Our HVAC systems aren't working. Piping in the ground is beginning to rust out. And so we're very concerned about the quality of the facility. It has very poor energy efficiency. It's the largest consumer of electricity in the city. It's a giant, huge building, and because the envelope is again not energy efficient, it is just a huge energy hog. It was built back when open classrooms were popular, the open classroom design, which means that they tried to keep classrooms open so people could move freely in and out, which I guess at one point seemed like a good idea, but since then we've discovered that it really wasn't a very good idea. So we've put dividers between the classrooms, we've jerry-rigged walls, they aren't soundproof, sound travels easily from classroom to classroom, and oftentimes our students have to walk through one classroom to get to another. So it just isn't an effective design for learning. Probably wasn't then, and it certainly isn't now. So those are just some of the really compelling needs in our elementary and middle schools. Our existing buildings, as I said earlier, do not support 21st century learning and teaching, and they also do not comply with current building standards and code. So we keep them up very well. We have a tremendous custodial staff, and our Director of Business Services and the Director of Maintenance do an excellent job of trying to keep them in operating order, but they clearly aren't current with building standards and codes, handicap accessibility being one of those areas in our buildings. So the next slide is about pursuing the MSBA grant. When I became superintendent, I did my first statement of interest. That's how you enter into the grant process. They have a very rigid process of developing the statement of interest. And with the advice of the former mayor, Mayor Tautznick, I did a statement of interest for White Brick Middle School. He also agreed that White Brick Middle School was in greatest need at that point in time of a renovation or a replacement, in particular because of the extremely high electricity costs. We were not brought into the grant program, and I thought, well, that's my first attempt, but maybe I'll just do something a little bit differently the next time and we'll have more success. In the second year of my 10 years as superintendent, I did another statement of interest for White Brook as well, still not even looked at. So in the third year, I began to think about how were we going to get a building project that would help us with our elementary schools and our middle school. And I realized that we had probably the way in through our elementary schools, all of which were 100 years old, and surely they would look at us for our 100-year-old elementary schools. So I put a statement of interest in for each of our elementary schools and our middle school, White Brook Middle School. And sure enough, they brought us in. We had to choose one school as a priority school, so I chose Maple School. Maple School doesn't have a gymnasium, it doesn't have an auditorium, it doesn't really have a cafeteria, it has a paved play area, so I chose that as the priority. And sure enough, they called and said they'd like to come out and have a look at our schools and talk to us. So Mayor Cadger and I met with this group at Maple School, and we toured the school, and they could see that it was in great disrepair. Not disrepair, but it had a lot of upgrades that were needed. And so in our meeting, I sort of had this in mind long before they came, this strategy. I said to them, well, would you be all right with us combining all of our elementary schools? Could we do one school pre-K to 4? And they said, well, yeah, we could consider that. It's not really what we want, it's what the community wants. And so I was emboldened by that. And I said, well, what about if we did a pre-K to 8? Would you consider that? Again, they said, well, it's not really what we want, but yes, if you wanted to try to put that forward, we would certainly consider it. So at that point in time, we took them on a tour of the other elementary schools, and they agreed to, they were only going to come for Maple, but they agreed to at least come over and look at Whitebrook. And I said, look at this beautiful setting where Whitebrook is. Certainly enough room to put a pre-K to 8. And so that was the way we were able to get all of our schools considered for a building project. And so now we're in the process. We're in the pipeline, I guess, as they say. And we've been following all the steps that we have to follow for this process. And Mel's going to talk about the process now.
Yeah, to give you a little bit, just to follow up of what Nancy had said, this is the overall timeline for just the what the MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, refers to as the feasibility and schematic design phase of the project, at which time it is concluded by a vote for funding. But just quickly to get you, take you through that, it is about a 2-year process. We went through the same process with the high school. This essentially the same team worked on it, and it started, as Nancy mentioned, in 2014 with a statement of interest. And it take some time after that, 6 months or so, the MSBA brought invited Easthampton into the process, and then back in December, we submitted the first report that had to go into the MSBA, which is referred to as the design program submission, preliminary design program submission, and that evaluated those options that superintendent found to be just outlined. The replacement for Maple, either as a renovation or a new, a combination of consolidated pre-K to 4 project, or a pre-K to 8 project as well. And so all 3 of those programs were submitted to the MSBA with an identification that the pre-K to 8 was the preferred solution, or at least the intention of the program that would best satisfy the needs of Easthampton. Since that December, so now we're into about ready to go into July, so for the past 6 months, we've been studying what is the best solution to go forward with, and we still have not submitted that, and we'll plan on submitting that in September. But we have been studying those things, as Tom mentioned, to determine what really is the best course of action in that regard. So going forward, this will be a submission in September. We will then the MSBA will approve. They have to approve that submission formally. We first go to what they call the on the second flag on the bottom there, the Facilities Assessment Subcommittee, which is a committee of the board of the MSBA that we go in front of and explain what the chosen solution is, assuming that it's a pre-K to 8, and explain why, and make sure that they're in agreement that it has the rationale that they can support. And every indication so far has been that they are very much in support of that consolidated school plan. Then, after they approve it, that subcommittee approve it, it actually goes to the full board, and we have to get the Massachusetts School Building Authority, MSBA, to formally approve by the board our preferred, what's called the preferred solution. Assuming that that's a pre-K to 8, we get that approval, and then we go into what's called a schematic design, which is a much more detailed and developed, I should say, development of the plan of the school, and develops a more formalized cost of the project. And that, as a result of that phase, we end up what is called a project scope and budget agreement with the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and that's what we're locked into, with a very defined scope in terms of size of the building, how it's laid out, and the total cost for that. That then is approved by the MSBA board. We are anticipating that to happen at the May board meeting of 2018, so in a little less than a year, for the MSBA board to approve that. And then we would be going to the vote in June. If you could go to the next fly in there. So getting up to that vote, you can see where we did have a public forum. This just added the public forums into the timeline. We had one in February, which I see some familiar faces coming back from that one. Thank you for coming back. The one where we're at right now is the one here in June. We are going to have another public forum next month in about 3 weeks or so. And then we'll have another one at least in the fall, and there may be other ones smattered through until the vote. But the key date here is June of next year, when it will go out to a vote to all of you voters for approval or not. And with that approval, then we proceed into the final development of the construction, what we call construction documents, that will be put out to bid in the ultimate construction, and that takes another 2 to 3 years to complete all of that. Potentially with school opening probably in the fall of 2021, or possibly fall of 2022. Okay?
So on the visioning process, as you can see on the slide, it consisted, I attended the visioning process along with our superintendent of schools, Nancy Follansby, school department administrators, teachers, students, parents, and community members. So it was a very well-rounded group. And the purpose of the visioning was so that we could discuss the current conditions of our elementary schools and define what's needed. And to define the priorities, goals, and vision for supporting 21st century learning. So how it happened is that the educational planners led participants in 3 days of visioning. They were 3 full days of our visioning process scheduled at different times. And it resulted in an educational program to guide development of a design for our school building project. Do you want to go over the priorities?
Sure. And so I think we had at least 30 people? Over 30 people in this visioning process, and they got us in small groups, and you can see some of the chart papers that went up on the wall. Each group had their own kind of vision, and so it was a really creative process, and a process that gave everyone a voice in what they believed we should have for facilities that would support our educational program here in Easthampton. And the visioning process helped us develop priority goals for the project, and you see them here. We love our small schools, and we love our small school feeling here in Easthampton, so we wanted to maintain that small school feeling, but with large school pride, because we're looking at a large school. So the vision had us thinking about grade level learning clusters, so first grades would be together and second grades would be together, and that would help us support a small school feel. Also to have a special area for pre-K students and a special area for kindergarten students. The elementary students would be all together, but again in separate areas so that the grade levels were together and smaller. And then the middle school in another section, and you'll be seeing more about that as we go on. We wanted our schools to be welcoming and transparent, and we wanted them to include clustered, accessible community spaces, particularly at the entrances. We wanted to have a separate entrance for the pre-K students and their families, pre-K and kindergarten. We wanted to have another separate entrance for elementary students and their families, and we wanted to have a separate entrance for middle school families and their students. Places where our families could gather with their students. Right now, they oftentimes gather out on our playgrounds, but we picture it in an open space where families could come in and be greeted and gather. We also wanted our school to support holistic and joyful learning. And this would be learning that was visible. We'd have lots of windows and gathering places for small groups and collaborative learning opportunities, that we would have maker spaces where students could go to do hands-on project-based learning, that we would have flexible learning spaces where individuals or small groups might be able to collect and work together on a project, or even spaces where we could bring 2 classrooms together to work on a project or to see a presentation. So those were some of the ideas that came out through the visioning process. We also wanted to have flexible and adaptable spaces, and I've kind of talked to you about that, and green spaces. We thought it was really important, especially considering what our elementary school students experience now. And if we were building it on the Whitebrook site, to take advantage of that wonderful green space, to have gardens, to have each cluster of grades have easy access to the outside for physical education, for play, and for opportunities to learn in that nature environment. So we were really excited about that. So those were our priority goals. And then the next thing that happened is we had to develop educational program options, or educational programs for each of the options. And so we had the 3 options that we had to develop programs for, using the information that we had from our visioning process and what we knew about our schools and our needs. So we had to do one for Maple Elementary School because that was the original statement of interest school. We had to do one for the consolidation of a pre-K to 4, and we had to do one for the consolidation of pre-K to 8. And considerations for each educational program required by the MSBA are listed there. They gave us a pretty lengthy document of requests for us to talk about what we currently had as an educational program and what we would like to have in the new facility. And we had to answer that for each of these items listed up there. I'm not sure if you can see them all, but teaching philosophies and methods, district's curriculum goals, grade and school configuration policies, class size policies, school scheduling method, teaching methodology and structure, teacher planning, pre-K and kindergarten, food service programs, technology instruction, visual arts programs, performing arts, physical education, special education, technology programs, transportation policies, security, and visual access requirements. So as you can see, it was a very, very thorough process, but it really helped us identify where we are now and what we need for 21st century education. So, why a pre-K to 8 facility? We knew that this was a question that we would have to answer. After the visioning process and the process of defining current educational programs in our schools and what we really needed in order to have 21st century programs, an education that will prepare our students to be ready for college and career in the 21st century, it was clear to all involved that the pre-K to 8 solution was the only solution that provided equity of educational experience for all students. If we just did the pre-K to 4, then our middle school students would not receive it. If we just did one school, then neither the other elementary schools or our middle school students would receive that same equity of educational program. So what are the reasons the feasibility study convinced us the preferred design best met our educational program and was the most cost effective? This slide shows us some of the most compelling reasons for considering a pre-K to 8 building solution. First, being equitable access to 21st century education. We've spoken about that already. Full handicapped access to educational program for all students. That's currently not available at Center School and it's not available at Maple School, only on the basement floor and the first floor. It is available at Pepin School, and it is available at Whitebrook, but we wanted all of our children to have this handicap access. Reconfigured grade alignment. Our families have been telling us for years now that they would like the 5th grade to be a part of the elementary school. This gave us the opportunity to do that, and you will see that in the designs later that that's exactly what we have done. So we'd have a pre-K to 5 wing, and we'd have an area for grades 6 to 8. It eliminates moving students from school to school. We have to do that now to balance class sizes and to balance to gender in our classrooms. So sometimes you might start in one school and have to move to another school, your children would. And that's hard for everybody. So this would eliminate that moving back and forth. Technology to support 21st century college and career readiness. I can't tell you what a difference it's made having our new high school and the technology that's available to our students in the high school. It's just made a world of difference. We want that for all of our students. Green spaces for science and nature studies, physical education, and gardens. I spoke about that already. Staff can be placed more effectively across grade levels. This would result in cost savings for us. We now have to duplicate staff from building to building, and being able to be in one building and moving among the building, there would be some cost savings there. Resources to better support students with special needs, that handicap accessibility, and just the many, many things that a new building would provide for our students with IEPs. It facilitates community building across all grades. Now we're kind of in silos. So you're a Maple family or a Center family or a Pepin family or a Whitebrook family. So this would bring all of our families together and really help to facilitate that community feeling. We'd have fewer transitions for students and families. Right now, if you're in our pre-K, you may not end up at Maple for kindergarten. You may have to go over to Center or to Pepin. Once you're in 4th grade, you're going to have to go up to 5th grade. And once you get to the middle school, you're going to have to leave the middle school and go to the high school, which you would do anyway, but you wouldn't have quite as many transitions. The pre-K to kindergarten is especially hard, and the 4th to 5th grade is hard. So we would really embrace being able to eliminate those transitions. Educational resources can be shared. Textbooks, literacy libraries, again at a cost savings to the district and the community and the city. Facilitates a strong continuum of curriculum and instruction, in part because of these configurations, the pre-K to 5 and the ability for teachers, all 5th grade teachers, to get together and in professional learning communities to talk about curriculum and instruction as an example. Opportunities for older students to mentor younger students. I know that there are some families who are concerned about middle school students being with elementary students, but we see this as a real advantage for mentorships that will help our older students grow and develop and certainly nurture our younger students. Supports family and community engagement pre-K to 8. I already spoke about that. Improved parking and access, yes, we need that in all of our schools. We don't have good parking and access in any of our elementary schools or at Whitebrook, so this would solve that problem. Safety, we'd have the latest safety equipment and safety features in a new school, and food services. We would improve food services as well. We'd have improved instructional spaces for STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, art, music, and physical education. So when we presented our findings to MSBA, they agreed to allow us to pursue the pre-K to 8, and we sort of sold it to them in this way as well. And then they requested that we consider every possibility for developing a plan that would best support the educational program we believe we need and would be the most cost-effective solution possible. And so that's what we've tried to do, and Bert now is going to be giving you a progress analysis of each option that was explored in the pre-K to 8.
Okay, so as Nancy said, one of our roles as the architect is to take the educational plans that were developed for each of the scenarios, the Maple-specific school, consolidated elementary school for a pre-K to 4, and then a pre-K to 8 solution. Okay.
So you can see better.
There's a lot to take in on this slide, so, and it may be difficult to read anyways with the font size, but I can boil it down for you pretty simply. What we've got is on the left purple column are just some of the key priorities of the educational plans that the district felt were most important. So an adequate site to build a school on and to provide outdoor space for students. Not to have to spend extra money on temporary classrooms during the school building process. Barrier-free access for all the students, you've already heard that talked about. Availability of 21st century technology in all the classrooms. 21st century teaching environment, starting with the teachers, the students, the outdoor space, the indoor space. Quality facilities for all grade levels, not just a specific school or certain age groups. And to support the district's educational plan and meets the long-term needs of the district. So then the colors are a stoplight, basically. Red is not so favorable, it's a stop. Yellow is okay, this could work, but caution's attached to that. And then green is obviously what makes the most sense and brings the district forward in the most efficient way. So the first 3, which are all red, would be just a Maple-specific option. Whether it was a base repair to bring it into code compliance, whether it was renovations and additions to the existing school or to build a new school. The bottom line is they still only serve 195 of your students and do not provide the equity across the student body that the district is looking for. D, which is towards the middle with some of the yellow integrated into it. That's a pre-K to 4 school. It would be built at Whitebrook. They could solve a lot of their access issues for that grade population. They could give those students equity of resources. 21st century technology could be incorporated into the building. We could solve things like the parking and the site issues that you've got at schools. But still, it's just your pre-K to 4th grade students, which leaves a gap in the 5th to 8th grade range, which is really a challenge for the district. Consistently with students choicing out. So the far right of you've got 3 options for a pre-K to 8 facility. The first one would be a new building. Obviously, all the green is because we have total control of how this building would come to be. They'd hit all of the key points that the district is trying to do. We'd meet their educational goals, and a lot of the key points that were developed during the visioning process. E1 and E2, which are the right and the far right, those would be ad reno projects or additions and renovations where we would try to reuse either most of Whitebrook's footprint. We'd probably reorganize classrooms to make sure that we had the right size rooms for a modern classroom. And then another option where we take down most of the classrooms and just try to reuse some of the key core spaces such as the auditorium, the gymnasium that you've got. And where the natatorium is, we try to incorporate kind of a core for cafeteria space and kitchens. As you can see, there's a little bit of yellow in this one, and part of the reason for that is, especially the middle one, it's the 80%, that would reuse more of Whitebrook. Just because of the size of the footprint of that building, you're left with a lot of classrooms that are kind of internal to the building and not on outside walls, so you've got students who would have to be in a classroom without windows or views to the outside. A connection with nature has been a really key, strong priority for the district to kind of get away from the small urban sites and give the kids an opportunity to be outside more and connect with the natural world. Obviously, if we get onto more of a larger addition and a smaller renovation project on the far right, you end up with an opportunity to get more rooms on the outside, better environments for the students to spend their day in. So this brings us to the district's preferred option, which would be a new pre-K to 8 school. You can kind of see the organization of it. We've got it kind of nestled up on the knoll to the left as you come into the school grounds. We could develop new parking areas, bus drop-offs, parent-student drop-offs to ensure that students are dropped off and have a safe path into the building.
There you go.
The organization of the school has always been kind of a priority. We wanted to make sure that you had a middle school section, an elementary school section, and then a buffer in between would be the shared facilities, your gymnasium. There's an auditorium incorporated into this one, which has always been planned kind of as an alternate. If we can do it, reach for everything you can go for. But it's not critical to the design whether or not that goes in. We can still meet all the educational goals with or without the auditorium, which is nice because we're losing the one that's in Whitebrook now to be able to provide that again.
In spite of what you might have heard, that gray oval up at the right-hand corner is the football field.
I was going to get to that. That's one of my notes that I have to talk about. There's actually several constraints on the site. When you drive into Whitebrook, it's a beautiful, open, location for a school. But there's a lot of wetland buffers there, environmental concerns. We've got the existing footprint of the building that if we can avoid getting into during the construction period, it eliminates the need for temporary classroom space, which leads to direct expenses for the temporary modular classrooms. And also,
you may want to trace the existing building just so people know where it is.
okay, well, it's going to be a little difficult, but the existing building basically starts here, comes down to here, and kind of follows that route about. So what we've done is we pushed our building as far as we could out of that footprint. And it shortens the construction period. We don't have to phase. We don't have to do multiple moves of students, build a section of the school, move some students in, build another section while parts come down. So with this solution, we could build the full facility and then move all the kids in at once when it was completed into a new school. The football field, which the community's put some investment into in the past years recently, we've managed to stay completely clear of the footprint of the football field with the construction of this option. One thing to keep in mind is we're still in very early phases, so we talk about an option, but not so much a detailed floor plan at this point. While we've worked out spaces to make sure that we can accommodate all the program areas and meet adjacency needs, it's really still a diagram at this phase, so just to keep that in mind. Purple again is the middle school, its own entrance right here. Yellow would be the elementary school with its own entrance right here. And then pre-kindergarten is actually at the end of this wing here. It could be segregated from the kindergarten classrooms also in that wing, and it's got its own entry right at the end here, which would come into a large open space where families could gather. Each one of these actually has a large open lobby space where you enter the building. Plenty of outdoor space. You can see Nancy had mentioned the small school feel, large school pride. We've really tried to put some effort into making sure that's what you have here. You've got a middle school community that's clearly defined. You've got the elementary school. We talked about grade clustering, so to kind of help with that small school feel, you've got 3 wings of grade clusters by age group, so that you can really kind of build communities and move along with that community as you progress through the age levels in the school. Again, natural light, windows to all the classrooms, connections to outdoor. You've got some open courtyards between the wings. Playground space can be developed, and then plenty of room on the site afterwards for development of fields and things like that if need be.
Just a comment, I think, the aha moment, if you will, on this plan was much like the high school is, even though this seems like a really large site, trying to get a new building fit in there while the existing Whitebrook remains is a significant challenge. As many of you probably may remember with the high school, we had the same problem. Relatively small site, and trying to avoid multiple phases where we had to tear down part of the building and move people in part, of a new part, and then, keep going back and forth. The ability to build a completely new building on the site and then tear down the old and move everybody into the new building and tear down the existing building is pretty significant, and Kayla and Bienick have worked hard to like I say, come up with that scheme that can do that, and we feel we've got it down now to the point where we can do it essentially with this one phase and one move. That affects cost pretty significantly, and obviously disruption and problems with school operations. So it's pretty significant.
I just wanted to make one comment too. The PowerPoint will be on our website, so you'll be able to have access to it after this forum.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the savings that we believe can result from a consolidated pre-K through 8 new building. And some of them have been mentioned already. Nancy in particular talked about, we do believe there's some staffing efficiencies. I'm going to talk about the non-staffing related efficiencies because there are several categories that we are confident will result in savings. The first is food service savings. Currently, all meals for the pre-K through 8 population are prepared at Whitebrook School and then transported to the 3 elementary schools. And that has implications for staffing, food service staffing. It has implications for equipment. You've got to transport that food safely and at temperature, and it involves a vehicle. And all of those things would go away if all of the children were in a single building. So we believe there are savings there. We're certain that there are preventative maintenance savings in a consolidated building. Right now we have 4 HVAC systems, 4 alarm systems, because there are 4 buildings. And all of them come with ongoing preventative maintenance expenses, service contracts that are redundant. When we go to a single building, there will be 1 HVAC system, 1 alarm system to maintain on an ongoing basis. We believe that there are significant emergency repair savings. We have aging buildings with failing systems. A very specific example of that is we've had 2 boilers fail entirely this school year, one at Whitebrook that serves the hot water system in the kitchen, and one at Center School that was part of the heating system. With a new building, with all new equipment, all of those very costly emergency repairs go away, at least for pretty significant short term. We believe that there are equipment redundancies that will result in savings. The kinds of things we're thinking about is all of the custodial equipment that's required to maintain the buildings, floor scrubbers and carpet extractors and vacuum cleaners. Right now, those are duplicated across 4 buildings. If all of these children are in a single building, it's just 1 fleet of that equipment that can do the whole building that can be used by the staff. The other side of that, other than custodial equipment, is the site maintenance equipment, lawnmowers, snow blowers, etc. We would be able to pare down the number of those that we need because there'd be a single site that they'd all be used on. We also believe that there is snow removal savings. Right now, that's an expense that's borne by the city, and they let a contract for that involves the maintenance of 4 sites. It would be a single site rather than 4. And then the other 2 that, because of how significant they are, and we've done an illustration to sort of walk you through, and that's electricity, power, and heating. So this slide is kind of complicated too, and I'm going to try to explain it briefly. On the left, you'll see each of the buildings' names, and it shows the fossil fuel and power costs over the last 12 months for each of those schools. And you'll see that on a per square footage basis, Pepin is the most expensive. It's about, I don't know, 165, 8, something like that. $1.65 or 68 cents per square foot. And then each of them is represented per square foot what they cost to heat and power. And if you go to the far right corner, you can see what the total expense has been in the last 12 years for each of those buildings. So although Pepin is the highest cost per square foot, you'll see that Whitebrook is the real highest consumer of dollars for heating and powering. The 4 schools that would be repaired are above the total utility costs total there that you see in yellow. below that is the high school. And you can see that the high school, which is close to the same size as Whitebrook, because it's new construction, well-insulated, state-of-the-art systems, thermo-paned windows, all kinds of things that will come with this middle school, you can see that their cost per square foot is significantly less than Whitebrook. And I think that's particularly impressive about the high school when we know that the high school gets more off-school hours use. It's used all the time. So even though it's used many, many hours in the day, it's much more efficient per square foot to heat and power.
And it's fully air conditioned too. as well.
And there is air conditioning. And then the other thing is that a lot of the it's very technology rich, which takes a lot of power. So even though all those things, it's still running in a much more efficient way in terms of operational cost. And then if you drop to the very bottom of the chart, I wanted to call your attention to two things. One shows you the amount of savings that we're predicting in terms of heating and powering the buildings with the new building, and it's just under $124,000 a year. It's very significant. Part of the reason for that is that it's a net reduction in square footage of 52,000 square feet. So it's going to operate more inexpensively. Plus, it's smaller than the other four buildings put together, and it results in a savings of about $124,000 a year, and that's pretty significant money.
Okay.
If I can just add one more
please
thing,
do.
I'm thinking with a reduction of 52,000 square feet, there are other operational costs savings in there as well.
Okay. Now, to get to the part that comes to what does all this stuff cost, we're still, just to give it a little bit of a preview, is that we're still in these very early stages of trying to identify what the new building is going to look like. It really hasn't been designed yet. We're dealing with typical square foot costs and that sort of thing. So it is still somewhat squishy, you might say. And as we move into what I described earlier as the schematic design, we'll get that much more nailed down. But for those of you who were here in the February forum, we had a pretty broad range of costs. We've narrowed that significantly because we've learned more and more as we continue to develop the project. But just to give you some of the rationale of, again, why the pre-K to 8 school new building makes sense, this slide represents some of that rationale. First of all, if you were to do nothing but just simply repair your four buildings, that's all four of them, including Whitebrook, the 3 elementary schools in Whitebrook, and brought them up to code, it would cost you $115 million. But that does not address any, essentially, of the 21st century education and the district's educational plans relative to space and environment and that sort of stuff. It's just simply repairing them and bringing them up to code. $115 million. With that, the things that go along with that option, if you were to choose it, would be you have to keep in mind that MSBA will only choose one building at a time. In other words, this, as we described before, they will support either a new Maple or a renovated Maple, a new consolidated pre-K to 4, or a consolidated pre-K to 8. Always one building, and that's their policy. So therefore, it's also, and I think I mentioned this in the February forum, we do a lot of work with a lot of different districts in Massachusetts. And you're very unique in that MSBA has invited you into their program twice within 7, 8 to 10 years, something like that. That's very significant for particularly a relatively small district. It's not it's not a major urban district that has, dozens of schools. So it's very significant that you've been invited in for the second time relatively soon. We opened, I think, the high school in 2013, I think it was. So here we are, only 2 years, essentially, having been invited in 15, 16, that MSBA invited you in. So for it to happen a third time, in other words, if you were to choose to do Maple, you're still going to be left with, obviously, the other two 100-year-old elementary schools and Whitebrook, which is not likely to be invited in. Anything's possible, but it's not likely to be invited in for a third bite at the apple too soon. I think also the repairs, of course, as I just mentioned, does not address any of the educational program. It really just repairs the building and addresses code issues. And if you take a repair and code approach, MSBA's reimbursement can be diminished because you're not meeting your educational program. They will support it. They will support those kind of projects, but it could be at a lesser amount. And those are all variable depending on the MSBA's perception of the particular project. On the other hand, the new pre-K to 8 school has a preliminary cost of $101 million to $109 million. That is to be compared to the 115 over the long term if you try to just repair your 4 schools buildings as they are. So immediately you're getting something a lot more for a significant amount, close to being the same or even less. You may remember in February, I think this range was more like 100 to 150 something or other. We are moved to the lower end of that. We feel very confident now that range has been narrowed to that, and we anticipate and hope that we will continue to reduce it and certainly narrow the range, if not even reduce the number below that. But we're trying to be conservative here at this point in time. The net range right now that we're predicting of that $101 to $109 million would be your portion, Easthampton's portion, to be about $52 to $61 million. So it's in that in the 50s, you might say, relative to your portion of the funding. And this is based on very complicated spreadsheets that MSBA provides, and we have to go through and look at each option. But that's what we've narrowed it down to and feel pretty confident. We did get some good news just the other day. As a matter of fact, yesterday the MSBA met, and they did relax their reimbursement on a cost per square foot basis. So we're actually anticipating that portion for you, in other words, their reimbursement will go up, therefore bring your portion down slightly more. And again, we're going to continue to work on this. There are a few other cost compare. Okay. Now to the tough news, you might say. The big numbers probably don't mean a lot to you because it's hard to decide, well, what does that mean to me and my tax bill? What we've tried to do, we've been working with the mayor's office, and this is still very variable depending upon what the mayor's office determines is the best value for the city to move forward with funding. But as you probably know, this requires debt, requires a bond to be taken out to pay for this project. Or I should say to pay the portion of the project that you're going to be responsible for. So the preliminary numbers that, again, we worked with the mayor's office. We used the $61 million, which is an assumption right at the moment for, we had to pick a number, and this is the number that we hope to bring down even further. We used a $61 million number, assuming a 4% interest rate. That also can vary, but from the best of advisors, that's what we're getting, and the mayor's office is getting, and suggesting that that's what our bond funding interest rate is likely to be. There is the choices of what the term is. This is much like the choices that you have to make in taking out a mortgage on your home. What's the term, what's the interest rate, what is the type of plan you're going into. Again, the bond range is in this 20 to 30 year range. That's variable. Again, left up to the mayor's office to determine what's the best deal for the city. And then there's different types of plans. One that you fix the principal amount, and therefore the payments would go down as time goes on. Another one is where you fix the payment amount over the term of the loan, and that remains flat. Or you have a combination of those. So all those are variables that enter into it. We applied it to what, again, is reported in Easthampton as the average home assessment, and it's the assessment that your home is not valued at, but it's the assessment amount of your home. The average here in Easthampton is $228,400. So we applied those assumptions to that average home assessment, and it comes out with this impact range of $2.98 to $3.83 per thousand of assessed value. If you translate and apply that to the average homeowner of $228,400, it results in an average tax impact per year of $680 to $875. It's an expensive option, and but the value of it is very, very unique for you in terms of an option. One of the things that happens with all of this, of course, is that by choosing this option, you have renewed your entire educational facilities system entirely in one shot, and at a very low cost relative to what what you would have to do otherwise. The thing that has happened, of course, here in Easthampton is that you have lived with 100-year-old elementary schools. In other words, you haven't put a lot of money into these aging schools. White Brook is one that's 45 years old. MSBA tends to look at, and we've been asked this of many districts, how can I get my awful 70s era building addressed by MSBA? They really feel strongly and evaluate strongly this idea that a building should last 50 years. So they're not anxious to jump into a building that is less than that. On the other hand, as Superintendent Follansby mentioned, from a district standpoint, that in some respects is your biggest challenge, is White Brook. It's costly to maintain, it's very uncomfortable, all those sorts of things. So this opportunity, which again I say is unique, MSBA has allowed you to wipe that slate clean by incorporating all these buildings into a single project, and the efficiencies of doing that are pretty significant. The downside is it hits your tax rolls pretty hard, being very frank about it. Otherwise, certainly from our point of view, very objective point of view, is that the choice of this option is a no-brainer. I mean, you get everything rolled into one at a much lower cost. The downside is it's a big ticket item, no question about it, and we wanted to be upfront and open about that. And we're working to lower all of that, the overall cost of the project. But we want to get that message out to you now to see what sorts of ranges we may be talking about in terms of tax impact. Is this one mine too? This one is mine too, right? As I just mentioned, and what Nancy and others have mentioned along the way, this is the only solution that meets all the student needs. If you address Maple, you're still dealing with two other elementary schools that are 100 years old and probably not likely to be addressed in the short term. Likewise, you've got White Brook. So if you move to even the pre-K to 4 solution or consolidated elementary school, you're still left with White Brook. So you'd be moving from, your students would be moving from great facilities at the pre-K to 4 or 5 level through to White Brook, which is problematic, as you all know now. then into the major high school, into the high school. So it'd be bookend on two ends in terms of great environments, but you're still left with a troubling Whitebrook school. This opportunity provides you to be able to take advantage of the MSBA's 62% reimbursement on eligible costs. That's pretty significant, obviously, when it's applied to all 4 buildings. Much more significant as it's applied to all 4 buildings than if it were just applied to Maple. And again, it's a unique opportunity that you have. One only knows how long the MSBA reimbursement may be available. It's interesting that every year the MSBA evaluates the reimbursement rate for every district. Your reimbursement rate has gone down slightly. That's a mixed message of bittersweet message, you might say, because what it suggests is that your socioeconomic condition here in Easthampton has improved, because that's what the reimbursement rate is based on. I think the base rate went essentially from 59 to 57. It didn't change a lot. But as your community improves, the reimbursement rate goes down. Most of the urban schools are at the maximum reimbursement of 80%, which is what MSBA's maximum reimbursement is. But as your community, and this is an up-and-coming community, I'm pretty confident that that's the case, and the numbers are beginning to show it, that reimbursement rate is likely to go down. So it's another advantage of grasping the opportunity now. As Superintendent Fowlsby had mentioned, it's this issue of addressing the facilities on all grades, as I just mentioned. The other aspect that is very hard to recognize in many cases is the impact of simple inflation. This example identifies that when we did your project, we were at this stage of the project we opened it in 2013, the high school, for a total project cost of $43,700,000. If that same building were started, if we were opening it in 2021, which is what our thought is for this new building, it would cost $60 million. So you can see the impacts of time. It gets lost in the short term, but these are very long process projects. So the impact of inflation is pretty significant on these projects. So obviously the sooner you can do it, the better, is really what it comes down to. The other aspect that is out there at the moment is that the bonding rates are still relatively low. One only knows, whoever has the crystal ball can determine whether they'll go up or down in the future, but the tendency is to think that interest rates are continuing to go up. The same thing works with construction. Construction rates and competition is still it has gone up significantly from when we did the high school, but it is still relatively low. Again, only a crystal ball would tell you whether it's how steep that's going to be as time goes on. Those are just some of the factors in looking at relative to deciding what to move forward with and when.
So we believe there are some other benefits to the community and to the city. Again, it promotes strong community building by keeping our children and families in our schools, but there's also perhaps a financial advantage. It keeps the resources in our city for community use. And FY17, the estimated cost to the city for school choice students is around $1 million. And the estimated cost to the city for charter students is close to $1 million. So overall, approximately $2 million leaves our city for students using the choice program or attending charter schools. What we've discovered since we built the new high school is that students leaving the district for choice and charter has been decreasing, and we've had an increase in students using the choice program to attend our schools. Our FY17 estimated choice in revenue is around a little over $600,000. So we anticipate that if we were to have 21st century facilities, we would be able to keep many, many more of our families and our students here in our community schools, which is clearly a goal for all of us. And the other reward of that is that there are financial positives for the city, because this $2 million comes out of the city coffers, and so is not available for other city services.
Okay, so just circling back to that timeline you saw in the beginning, just wanted to highlight a couple of dates. We have another public forum scheduled for July 18th. On September 14th, we'll be submitting our preferred solution. That's after receiving all the feedback, what have you, leading up to that. We'll be submitting that to MSBA. In September, we'll have another public forum. And also in September or early October is a meeting with the MSBA Facilities Assessment Committee. That's a lot of words.
It is. It's that committee I mentioned earlier where we have to present our proposed project to the subcommittee of the board, who then recommends to the full board that we or that they accept our proposed project.
And then shortly after that subcommittee, as Mel said earlier, on October 25th, it goes to the full board for approval of our preferred solution. So with that, I would just like to say that, again, the purpose of this forum and the forums coming are to get the facts out, to get the information out. This committee wants this process to be as transparent as possible. All of these meetings I've been talking about are public, open to the public. Again, we want to make sure the facts are out there. The press is here tonight. I believe social media will begin to light up with some of the information. So with that, we would love to open it up for questions you may have. We'll do the best with the folks up here or some in the audience, Curtis, who may want to answer the questions. Michael,
We need them to come up.
do we need them to come up?
They won't be able to hear them on the local access channel if you don't come up.
So if you'd like to come up to the podium, just so they can hear you on television. Michael. We didn't want to tell you before the meeting you were being televised. But just so the public can hear your question.
Yeah, I'm Mike Burley. Just to verify, you said October of 17, we hope to get the approval, and it's going to be at least 4 or 5 years before we see a building, correct?
20 of 21, with any luck.
21 or 22 possibly, yes.
Just to
right.
be sure everybody understands it's going to be
That's
a
right.
while.
It is 4 to 5 years. You're right, Mike.
As like the high school, of which I was a member of the building committee, we started and it took us 10 years to get to the
Yep,
building phase.
it's a long process.
It does take a long while, so people don't need to get antsy because it's going to be a while.
Yep,
Thank you.
thank you, Mike. Yes.
Hello. My name is Lindsay Rothschild, and I have a 4-year-old, so this is kind of a no-brainer for me in terms of the tax impact, because, I mean, when I consider sending my child choicing out, it's the facilities that really pushes me to, it's the facilities that makes me kind of think about and consider choicing out. So it's a no-brainer for me. But I'm wondering why you didn't consider a swimming pool in the plan. And I'm thinking of a lot of seniors that are going to be impacted by this tax increase, and they're living in fixed incomes, and I feel like a swimming pool would benefit the whole community, especially our seniors, where it's such a great form of exercise, and also people with disabilities. It's also a really great benefit for them, so I'm wondering why not a swimming pool?
Mel?
Mel?
Well, the first answer is that MSBA will not reimburse for a swimming pool. So it would be fully financially the responsibility of the city. I think I'm not going to answer for everyone, but it's just getting to be too big of a price tag, too big of a tax impact. Even as Bert had mentioned before, the auditorium is one of those ones that could come in or out as well. Again, because if we do get reimbursement, it would be minimally from the MSBA, and just the concern relative to the tax impact is, can you afford it, is really what it comes down to. It's all about affordability.
Yeah, I think too, it's a nice luxury to have, but not that we're trying to get this bare bones, but we are talking about a $100 million project here already. And the more we add items to this that aren't reimbursable, the more it increases that tax hit. We do have history of issues with a pool in a building.
Not a good history.
Not a good history of issues with a pool in a school. I'm not sure the usage was ever where we thought it would be, and the maintenance is just, no pun intended, through the roof. So
Right, operational costs.
Insurance, there's an
insurance,
impact.
operational costs, and
Operating costs.
And size of the building too would have to increase
Yeah,
on
the
what's
footprint.
already a tough site to
Right,
develop
so,
on.
as I was just asking Bert, and that is a really good question, and I thank you very much for bringing that up, because I think that has been circling but hasn't been brought out in a forum. So, but we're looking at the footprint, and as Bert was saying earlier, a lot of that is wetlands, and a lot of that land, even though it looks so massive, isn't usable. So then you're adding to the footprint of the building as it is, and as you know, there are specific areas we don't want to use, as we
Encroach on,
mentioned before.
good point, though. Great point.
Yeah.
Sorry, too many hands went up when I wasn't paying attention.
Hi, I'm Sarah Amoroso. I have 3 little boys. 2 of them are in Maple right now, and I would just love to reiterate how much we love Maple. It's a wonderful school. However, I feel like I would like to know, if we reject this in the vote, what is the likelihood that the MSBA will ever speak to us again? Because I feel like we've spent $1 million on the process to develop plans and
That's right, right.
schematics and everything, and we've gone through this whole thing with them. If we reject them, they're probably not going to want to talk to us. So
Yeah, it's a tough one first of all, if you wanted to go through the feasibility study again, MSBA pays for the reimbursement on the $1 million that you just mentioned as well. So literally, your cost is $400,000 because it's around that 60%. The next time around, you'd pay for that. Easthampton
for the whole-
would pay for it entirely, and they don't look too favorably on districts that turn things down. They say, because there's the competition for these grants is pretty stiff. It's not, you don't just, as Nancy knows, or suggested, she put in all these statements of interest and didn't get chosen. So the competition is stiff, and if a district has turned it down, that's an indication that they're not ready or interested in really anteing up, you might say, to improve their school. So you're absolutely right that the chances are, anything can happen because you can't really predict, but I would say your chances would go down significantly from getting a project, yes.
do you think our chances are pretty good right now? Like, did
Well,
they?
I think, if you don't mind,
Sure.
if you don't mind, Mel.
No.
So regarding MSBA, I really want this information to get out there. They could not be more cooperative, more helpful to work with. When you're working with them, they want your project to succeed, which is one of the main reasons we're here, and we will have, forums in the future, because they want this project to succeed, and they work with you every step of the way, but the final decision is your voters.
So the
And that is
community-
why we're here, to get whatever questions, whatever concerns, whatever input. That is the main focus of these forums. Obviously, to provide you with where we're at in the process, but it's the voters that make the decision on this. And that was another really good question, because when you brought that up about the feasibility study, the next feasibility study would not be a reimbursable, would not qualify for reimbursable.
And Mayor, just to pick up on that too, the October 25th date that we expect them to approve, part of the reason for all these forums leading up to that date is we really want to get a sense from the community of their willingness to support this vote. So we want to go into this with our eyes wide open, and I'm confident that they're going to approve this in October.
Right.
But it would be foolish of us to push forward for that approval if there was an overwhelming outcry from the community that said we're not going to support this.
Well, I would just
So-
say that though our love for Maple School is great, I know that it can't last forever,
Right, right.
which is a little sad.
We're trying to make it last forever, but
And talking about Maple School, which we do get so many people that have such an allegiance to that, that was where our first meeting with MSBA was, and we were in the basement area of that. And they were just so amazed. I mean, opening closets that are, every space that we have in that building is so utilized. They were just unbelievably impressed.
One of my sons goes to speech in a closet right now.
Right.
I mean, you walk down the stairs and you see right into the boys' bathroom. You know, I mean, it's.
So that led to the beginning of, just that meeting there, like, almost like, are you serious? We cannot believe what you have done with this building. I mean, there's no other build-out involved in there. It is just used to capacity, and like you said, and closets, every room is used to capacity. They were very impressed with that and the upkeep of it. So again, they want your projects to succeed, but it's not their final vote, it's the voters that decide whether these projects go through.
Thank you.
I don't know if this is kind of a follow-up. Is voting to approve the school plan, including the tax, is that in addition to an override, like a
No, it's
2.5,
called the
or does it, you vote for that and then you have to vote for the taxes?
No, it's all one. And we were talking, I believe, June of 2018 is the proposed time that this would go to the voters, and that is the vote where it would be for the project itself, and that has what, the cost to the taxpayers on it. So that's basically what the taxpayers are approving. They're approving a project knowing what it would cost them.
Okay. And then I have a logistical question. So if each of this sort of separate age groups in one campus, would they have different start times to the schools, or would they all start and end at the same time?
You can take that one, Nancy. There's been a lot of discussion about that. And she can probably
I'm a
go
teacher
right.
too, so I know
Yeah.
that there's a lot of logistical things.
That is to be determined. It's an easy answer. We don't
Along
know
with
that yet.
transportation.
Yeah, along with transportation.
A lot of busing questions on that, too.
yes.
Hi, I'm Andrea Marks. So this is, you have to sweeten the deal for the community. It's a no-brainer for me. I have a 4-year-old, same 4-year-old. So I think the pool is a way to do that. An aquatics program is a way to do that, but maybe it's cost prohibitive. But I think that what we need to do is send the message, or get from the community, what can we do for our seniors and our people on fixed incomes, so that this is a no-brainer for them, because as is, that's a big impact. That tax is a big hit. So if it's not a pool, maybe you do like Plan A, Plan B with a pool without a pool, or the auditorium, I'm a little unclear about that it's
an
optional.
We're looking,
or-
well, in order to try to get some of these costs down, we're looking at that as an alternate, which would be an option. But
I'm an educator and as well, and I can't imagine you not having an auditorium,
correct,
a
but
place for
MSBA
people to
Cafetorium.
gather.
It would be
A
a
cafetorium.
the cafetorium is part of a reimbursable MSBA cost, but other costs are not. A pool is 0% reimbursable. But I can also tell you a little history, and that's very thoughtful that people are thinking of our seniors, because it's something that we all are concerned with. And I can tell you at the very beginning of the project, Tom Brown also happens to be on the board of directors for our Council on Aging. The seniors were very excited about adding a building to our school, and thought this would be a great time. Not only would we get all our schools in order, we would have a brand new facility, senior center. And obviously that became extremely cost prohibitive at the time, and because it's 0 reimbursable on that. And so, but, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, I just was asking Mel or Bert to speak to that auditorium question,
Yes.
because it's not typically something that's associated with an elementary school, an auditorium. So I believe the auditorium is on us totally already.
Right.
It is completely, MSBA only supports auditoriums at the high school level, so not at the middle school level or the elementary school level.
And
But there's the
cafetoriums.
There'd be a cafetorium, which would be reimbursable, or sometimes we will put a stage combined with the gymnasium, one way or the other, but it's still considered the cafetorium and reimbursable. An actual auditorium space would not be. The reason we're looking at it is because you're losing an auditorium with Whitebrook, and there's basically been a lot of, similar to the pool, a lot of outcry about losing that space, so.
Good evening, Wally Rampolis of 1 South Hampshire Street. And under your priorities, where you identified holistic and joyful learning as being one of the objectives here, I am also of the thought that when we look at priorities for a public school system, we don't necessarily focus on the dollars, or quantitative, but also in a qualitative sense. Now, when you speak about that, how can you use like that one priority or something that is an intangible and not addressed in terms of dollars and cents? These intangibles, how can you use them as a marketing agent so that that argument can speak just as strongly as those elements in a quantitative sense?
I think that's a great point. I was thinking of that with the last question, and I'm not sure I'm going to hit on your question, Wally, but if I don't, you can correct me. But there may not be tangible benefits for the population as a whole, but those intangible, there's all kinds of studies out about what schools, a high level of education or a high level quality of buildings does to the overall tax base or value of your homes. There's a whole, and I wish I had it with me, I apologize, but there's a study out that shows what, I mean, you know, the high tide floats all boats here. The other thing is I remember hearing my mother say years and years ago that someone paid, Tom, when you went through the school system. Now it's my turn to help the generation behind me. So we all have a responsibility as a collective community to educate our children. And just because you may or may not have children in the school, I don't think we have to start to look for the various carrots to entice people. I think they're there already. And it's part of belonging to a community. It takes a village. We can't do this with just the school population, folks. We need every single Easthampton resident to support this project because tangible or intangible, every single resident benefits from a strong school system.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Walt.
Hi, I'm Patty Benson, and I'm 100% in support of this project. I think it sounds amazing. But my question is, what everyone in town says when this comes up is, Whitebrook was built on a swamp, it immediately started leaking and having problems, and now we're going to build another school in the same spot. So my question is, what will make this different so that this school isn't leaking and sinking, but also just as important, how can we educate the public as to the difference? Because I've heard people say, if it's at Whitebrook, I'm not going to support it. So that's something I'm concerned about.
Great question. And
I'm going to sit down to hear your answer.
you know, what's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. But
The difference is really in building technology. We've done geotechnical investigations at Whitebrook now. At this point in the project, we've got a report from an engineer. The soils and the site conditions at Whitebrook are exactly the same conditions we've got at the high school. And we overcame those in the high school just because technology has come so far since Whitebrook was built. What we did at the high school, and it's not necessarily the same thing we'll do, but it's certainly factored in as one of the options. But we preloaded the site with you know, a big pile of earth, if people recall if driving by, that weighed the same amount as the school to pre-settle the site. Then we've also got a series of things called geopiers, which are, you know, stone piles that go into the ground and stabilize the supporting earth that's going to, you know, support the weight of the school to keep it from settling and things like that. So really, technology has come a long way since Whitebrook was built. And
I think that makes perfect sense. I really appreciate that answer, and I think that getting that to the public, and that is going to be a huge part of the education that needs to get out there so we can get this passed.
Great point, great point, thank you.
And I just want to say, I think that's a great point, and we are planning to put information on the website. So, you know, as you're talking about that, I'm writing this down, that we could have these questions with answers posted on the website so everybody could access them. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Nicole Morrison. I have a 1.5-year-old. So I came, hearing that you were doing pre-K to 8 made me nervous. So I came here to learn more information. You've made a lot of really good points about the environmental factors, but I'm wondering if you can talk about the educational and academic impacts that having K through 8 would have.
Well, we believe that whatever educational impacts there would be positive. We think that this is a wonderful opportunity to create a wonderful early childhood center at the new facility. So as we mentioned earlier, there'd be a separate entrance for preschool. It'd be almost like a little preschool, separate preschool school. And the kindergarten would be near it. There would be access to a fenced-in play area for both areas. And so the primary students would be really pretty much separated from the rest of the school, except that, as I mentioned earlier, we think there are wonderful opportunities for our middle school students or our upper elementary students to come and mentor. Just like at our high school, we have a Tiny Tots program, and our high school students love to be part of that Tiny Tots class because they come and they work with our preschool children, and we see that it is just a wonderful opportunity both for the preschool children and for our high school children. So I think it opens the opportunities for collaboration and strengthening our curriculum and our instructional program. We're very excited about it.
I was doing some research prior to coming here, and there was at least one study that had Brookline in it that stated that if you do the pre-K through 8 as opposed to pre-K through 5 and then 6 through 8, math levels increase on the long term and through high school. So
I've read that too,
Okay.
so better yet. And you know, right now we do have a gap between a 4th grade and 5th grade too. And so I think closing that gap is also going to help academic achievement. But yes, good point.
And in the visioning process that we mentioned before, by the way, that was held right up here, the 3 full-day meetings, a lot of discussion went into that. We knew right off the bat that was going to be some concerns for a majority of the families in Easthampton. And so a lot of, and as you can see when Bert was showing the design, you know, the entrance and how it's set up, so a lot of talk and a lot of discussion was had on that.
The other thing that I think is worth mentioning is that the architectural firm, as part of their team, has a partner that's our specialist in early childhood education. So the design team consists of 2 different architectural firms, one that has a real specialization in early childhood education to bring those issues to the fore in the design.
There she is.
Thanks. That's my opportunity to introduce myself. I'm Tamar Warburg from Studio G Architects, and we are the early education consultants on the project. We're an architecture firm from Boston, and we've done a lot of these projects before. Part of what's been such a pleasure working with Bert and CBA on this job is really pulling apart the pre-K wing with a separate entrance as part of the broader project. And in fact, one detail we didn't have time to go into is that every grade will now have its own wing on its own floor, with then separate access to the outside for pre-K, K, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and on the 2nd floor, 4th and 5th. So it's really an opportunity to create kind of a customized grade cohort with the educational planners and the educational program for these flexible spaces for each grade level, indoors and out. So I think there's been a lot of thinking here about how to translate the educational program into an architectural form, including addressing the needs of the youngest children. So for us, it's very exciting. glad to be able to introduce myself.
Thanks, Tamar.
I would just say too that along those lines, I've had conversations with Nancy months and months ago, and a lot of concern about, you know, pre-K through 8 all in the same building and interaction. And I think what Nancy said is we can turn that challenge into an opportunity, and the opportunity is mentoring, developing leadership, having 8th graders mentor younger kids in certain areas in certain ways. And keep in mind, this campus will now be in the shadow of the high school, and there's a possibility for lack of a better phrase, this comes from my senior center, intergenerational type programs between high school and middle school, or high school and grade school. So a ton of opportunities for a lot of cross-pollination here with education. I look at that as opportunities more than a problem. Done.
I'm Don Torrey, and I had some questions. Did you say that it would be less expensive if you could knock down White Brook first?
Not first. The idea is that it's least expensive if you can keep White Brook operating while you build a new building, so that you don't have to disrupt the students, build a new building, move them into the new building, and then tear down the old building.
Is there enough land? Is this going to be 2 stories or 1 story?
There's the elementary school side of the building is 2 stories. The middle school side is 3 stories, and that's a factor of the amount of land that we have to develop on.
But if you had White Brook gone, you'd have more land, correct?
You'd have more land, but that leads to
Do you want to see the
efficiencies.
picture, Don? We can, maybe you, right.
So, White Brook is like here today.
Well, what I was just bringing up is, in the past, they've always done double sessions at the high school while they were building the new building. And if you need that land to change the design, maybe at all 1 floor. And have you also considered steel buildings? I mean, if they're only going to last 50 years, a steel building construction would be less expensive if you're talking wings. That's just a thought. And busing, is it going to be more busing or less busing?
To be determined.
That's along with the timing. There'll be a lot of discussion held on that.
And will there be storage room for the teachers' projects and stuff? Like
Yes.
Maple
Oh,
Street
yes.
has the coat rooms and things.
Yes, yes. Now, we're very, our
Discussion.
teachers who are in the visioning process are very excited about that. All new buildings have far greater storage areas than our old buildings, and that would be a key consideration for our classrooms.
And the other thing on the busing, is it going to all start at the same time? Are the 8th graders going to be on with the kindergartners, or?
No, probably not. But as I say, we really haven't even started to think about that. There are schools that do that, but I would not expect that would be the case. I think
I had some parents say to me that
Right.
they're absolutely against it
Yeah.
if that's what it's going to be.
Yeah, nor, I do not expect that would be the case, that our elementary students would be riding the buses at the same time. We're, if I were to guess what's going to happen, it would be staggered like it is now. So, the buses would bring the middle school students, and then the elementary students, go out and get the elementary students, just like we do now.
And when considering the upgrades and things, are they considering heat pumps for heating the building and cooling it? I know it's a lot less expensive than running air conditioners.
It's early on now. I can say that the engineers we have on this are plugged into the latest technologies. They're looking at chilled beams and other very efficient systems right now for the HVAC systems. Part of the report that's going in September will be a narrative on what they're recommending for that. So they're in the early phases of that, but it'll be the most current technology, the most
Have you
efficient systems.
considered
that we've got.
geothermal?
Geothermal has not been explored on this site right now for a number of factors, but one of the things, coming back to one of your earlier points about a larger, lower building, we have looked at several options, not just this one, for a solution on the site, and several of them have come into the footprint of White Brook or taken over different areas of the site and have been much more of a
It's not
sprawling
been
footprint,
uncommon
but-
to do double sessions. They did it when the first high school was built, they did it when middle school was built, and it seemed to work out all right. So, I mean, if you need the space, I mean, we shouldn't be considering spending all this money on it and then having a design that we're forced to have because of space that we really do have.
Right, and I don't think that's the case in what we've come up with on this. I think that we've really kind of come up with a solution that meets the educational desires with the grade clustering, and access to the outside and separation of middle school and elementary school populations.
Now, playgrounds, will like the preschool have its own playground,
Absolutely.
kindergarten,
Yep.
and then,
So playground for the preschool, another playground for the other elementary age school students. So.
I had one other question. And you're looking at a cafetorium?
We're currently looking at a cafetorium. We've got the way the plan is structured right now is it'll be a cafeteria. There's actually distributed dining in the elementary school so that the kids aren't coming to one centralized location. They can stay more with their grade clusters. There is a middle school cafeteria. The stage right now backs up to the gymnasium, and then on the opposite side of the stage is where we're proposing the optional auditorium, so that whether or not the auditorium is taken, you'd have that cafetorium space, but it would be utilizing the square footage of the gym, which is larger and could hold more people than a cafeteria could.
So the kitchen is not going to be right next to the
It'll
cafeteria?
be right next to the middle school cafeteria.
So where are the little kids?
Those dining rooms right now, and as I said, this is very early in the design stage, so these are just concepts that are being evaluated. But in the current model that's shown on the school, they're at the end of the grade cluster wings there.
So they'll have to bring the food?
So they would transport the food on carts to a serving
Seems it
line.
would be a lot easier to bring the kids to the cafeteria. I've been in several schools, and the cafeteria and the gymnasium abutted each other, and when they used it as an auditorium, they had the whole school could fit in it, which is unusual.
And there's pros and cons to each approach that are being evaluated. I mean, a lot of schools we do, they want those together. It's good for supporting dances, athletic functions, to be able to have an area where snacks can be served and stuff with the cafeteria. I think that what our focus on this scheme, and we've got options that we've looked at that have just a centralized cafeteria for the elementary school and then in the middle school adjacent to. The community building, the small school feel, is really what we were targeting when we kind of came up with this option. But again, it's just one of many options we're looking at, and it's the one that was presented tonight. But there are several options looked at this point.
Custodial-wise, it'd be much more costly to have all these cafeterias.
Right, there'd be 3 cafeterias in total, rather than 2.
Okay, but nothing's written in stone as far as
Nothing's written
design.
in stone.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Don.
you.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Chloe. I don't have a question. I just wanted to comment on some concerns. So I was a freshman when we moved from the old high school building to the new one. I just wanted to say, like, having it built while I was still in school, like, the transition was incredibly smooth, and it was also really exciting. Like, one day we were in that other classroom, the next day, like, there was no interruption in, like, what we were doing, like, classroom-wise, so I thought that was really awesome, and I know there was some space concerns, but I just wanted to say, like, that transition worked really well for me personally and for a lot of my fellow classmates. And then also the high school has an incredible auditorium and like performance space, so if you're worried about that, like, the whole community can use the high school building, I feel like. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Chloe.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I would think, go.
One more question. I was wondering when and how we can get engaged with the committee to, help campaign.
Yeah, Deb Luznia, who's on vacation away tonight, is on this committee. She's also on the school committee, and she's spearheading that, I believe.
We'll put that information on the website as well.
So that you will know who to contact to get your names. So,
Yep.
and believe me, they'll be calling you.
Yes, they'll be calling you.
And thank you for your interest.
you.
Greatly
Yeah.
appreciated.
But I want to thank everybody for your questions.
Great.
Great questions. Helps us to get that information out. Just to go back to something the mayor and the superintendent both said earlier, the success of this project, I believe, does not hinge on the MSBA approval. That will happen. The success of the project hinges on the residents of Easthampton supporting it in that June of 18 vote. So we need to get the word out there. We need to make sure people understand the benefits, the issues that you raised of construction that might be of concerns. We need to get all those facts out there. So talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors. The press is going to help us write a real great positive, upbeat story, and we'll get this out there on social media and bring back a bunch of friends on July 18th. Anything else from the group?
Just to add to that is the June vote is when it either lives or dies, but the September submission and the October approval at MSBA is the project that you're voting on in June. So really the decision happens at the end of the summer, and it's these public forums that are going to give us the feedback of what the community is really going to support in a project. So it really is, to underline your point, Tom, extremely important that we share the information with the community and get the feedback that we're looking for.
Right, and I think you should repeat that, because that to me is really
turning
the
back
priority. That once the project is submitted, that is the project that we are submitting. So all of the decisions as to what goes to MSBA, what they approve at that point, that's important. And that date again, Bert?
So in September, we're submitting our report to MSBA in September in preparation for their October board meeting. And in between that, we meet with the Facilities Assessment Subcommittee, and they're the ones that make the formal recommendation to the board.
The school building committee has actually elongated this process specifically because we want to make sure that we're going to the MSBA with the right option that the community will support. So we originally were planning on submitting this
Yesterday.
today. But we decided, or I should say the committee decided, that no, we really want to make sure that the community is behind the solution we submit, because as we've said tonight, there's no turning back, you might say. If this fails, it's a tough road to haul after that.
And it's a large project and an expensive project, so the whole goal is to get the input of the community as to is the support of the community for this project.
Yep. Don?
I just have one other question about gymnasiums. Is Pepin School going to be closed down because there's a shortage of gymnasiums to begin with?
Maybe you can talk quickly about the surplus process.
Right, so what happens is when the buildings would become vacant, those are under the school would provide them to my office, surplusing them. And after that, it goes to the city council for decision of if they want to put any requirements on surplusing the buildings, how we go about it, if the building can be torn down, not torn down, usage, that type of thing. You probably remember it, the most recent school building that we surplus was Parsons Street School. So, and the restrictions that were put on that and dividing the lot and all of that. So that's the process. So once they're, I guess the good news is if they were vacant, would be really good news for our project.
Yeah.
It would mean this project went through, and we go from there as a surplus them. And we have actually been a little excited about the locations of these schools. I mean, if this project is to go through, and we're talking about our elementary schools, their locations are prime. You know, you have Maple, Pepin, Center.
Yeah, we've said, myself and some other committee members sit on the Economic Development Commission, and the possible vacating of these school buildings and where they're located could be one of the biggest economic boons to downtown Easthampton in a long, long time. Potential housing, potential business, performance space, what have you. There's a ton of opportunities when these buildings get surplused. Based on their location, proximity to downtown.
So the gymnasium could possibly stay.
It could possibly stay. We just have to find someone who wants to create housing and keep a gym, Don, in the background. You'll do that. Okay, Don put in the first bid for Pepin School. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you very much.